So how do you know what rock to look for?
I just look for something that looks solid. Flat plains, flat surfaces, something that isn't cracked on the outside. A lot of these rocks are going to be cracked on the outside because they've experienced weathering. Lots of weathering and erosion happens and moves these rocks, and you see cracks and fractures on the outside. But what's on the outside doesn't mean that's what's going to be on the inside. You may cut some of that away and find some really solid material on the inside that you would be able to cut and it wouldn't fall apart. So I'm looking for signs of that on the outside of the rock.
Is it mostly quartz, or what do you mostly find in here?
It's mostly quartz in here. There's a little bit of calcite. Calcite is softer, but it can be cut. You're just a little gentler, softer touch. There is probably some material that would be considered an agate, just because of if you think about it like wood, because of how tightly grained the rock is. So it doesn't have as many fractures and open places. That tighter grained rock, if you want to think about it in terms of wood grain, would maybe be considered an agate. It may look like quartz, but it's only the technical term that would classify it as that. But it's all, pretty much everything I found in here does look like quartz, has that appearance for sure. But you never know what you're going to find. You just got to keep digging. I tend to go for the more open places, but it's also the places like this one that I'm in that are kind of muddy. There's a lot of mud that's built up in here. That mud will trap and hold rocks. So those are good places to look too, because there may be some rocks that have been hanging out in there for a little while if we've not had a big rain. And, you know, if you overlook those places, you may be missing something. This is an interesting little rock. It may have some calcite in it, but it's got a little color, so it would be worth trying out. You never know. You may get in there and it may just fall all to pieces, but it would be worth giving it a shot. Because you're not out anything if it didn't work. You didn't pay any money. You just walked down here and got some free exercise and looked for a rock. I'm going to take this piece home with me and cut it. It's got some interesting mica, and it's got a few places that look somewhat solid. Maybe this part right here, I'd be able to cut that and then get a cabochon or two out of it. It'll be interesting to see what I can do with it. This is a really, really good rock. It's a good find. It's actually flat on both sides, so it's going to go through my saw really easily. And this is more of that rock that I was talking about maybe being considered more of an agate than quartz, because I can look on the outside and tell that it's a tighter grain. There's going to be less fractures to run into, and I can probably kind of slice it like a piece of bread, go straight down through there. So that was a good find. That's a good piece. I'm going to take that with me. This is a good find too. It's a little big, but I can take it with me if I want to. Oh boy! Look what I found. So sometimes I find pieces of pottery, like old plates or cannon jars, things like that, because my grandparent, well, my great-grandpa, my great-great-grandpa, and some of my ancestors lived here, and they lived on up the creek, so sometimes some old pieces like this will wash down, and there's a great likelihood that it was theirs. There's some other people that lived up there as well, but you never know. My great-great-grandpa could have ate off that. It's a piece of a plate. Here's the edge. And you can see the back there. So that's great. That's a really cool find. That's exciting. I think that's probably my favorite thing to find, even more so than the rocks. Because the rocks are cool, of course. But this is probably something of my own family. So that's really neat. That's a good find. You'll find stuff like that after a big rain and it's rained a lot. Everything will wash. So that was a good one.
So why the creek? Why do you have such a close connection and relationship with the creek?
I think it started when I was a kid. We would play, we'd build clubhouses, we'd play in the woods, we would stack rocks up. We just wanted to find somewhere to play, and we would change our play spot, every month or so. And when I say we, I mean me and Corey, my sister, and our first cousin. She was more of a sister to us because she had 2 brothers, so she spent a lot of time with us. She was about a year younger than us. And we started playing in the creek too. And as kids, that's just what we did. We played in the creek, we played in the woods, and when we would play in the creek, we would come up with little games like we would look for certain kind of rocks, and whoever had the coolest shaped rock would win the game, or whoever had the coolest shaped rock, we'd pretend that we had a little stores and we'd buy rocks from each other. And our currency was other rocks, but our currency was little white pieces of chippy quartz that we would find, and the creek is full of it. So we would pretend that that's money, and then if we wanted to buy like a big rock or a small rock, we would just have a little trading system, and we would spend hours and forget about coming in for lunch. We would just spend our day digging around in there, seeing what we could find, and then we would play the games where somebody would be mama, somebody would be the baby, and we'd dig holes. We'd dig out a big spot in the creek and we'd sit down in it, and that displacement would push the water up to about right here, even though the hole wasn't that deep, and we weren't that big at that time. And whoever was going to be baby would have to get in the hole, and we pretend to give them a bath and soak them and just have a good time. And it started like that. I mean, we just were playing, and I was like, I really like to look for rocks, and this is really fun. And I think just that thought of, oh man, here's this really pretty rock, this really pretty object, and here it is, and it's just out there waiting for me to find it, and it's free, it's mine. I found it, and kind of the excitement of one more rock, turn over, one more rock. Look over here, look over there. I want just a little bit more time, see what I can find. You have no idea what you're gonna find. That excitement of what is waiting next. And so it started there, and I had no idea what it was gonna turn out to be years and years and years later.
So from playing in the creek, you kind of went from playing in the creek to collecting rocks, and you'd bring home rocks and you put them under your bed and you put them on the porch and you put them anywhere I would let you put them, basically.
Yeah. Basically so. I mean, it was just like, oh, this one is so cool. I don't want to throw it back. I want to keep it. So I started collections like rocks based on shapes. So I had all these rocks that looked like triangles, or ones that were almost square, or ones that were kind of oval. And then I had collections based on what kind of quartz they were. Were they white? Were they yellow? And I just was fascinated. And then it started leaking out into other areas of my life. I started picking up rocks everywhere, which I'd always done. I'd come home with, from school, from recess, I'd have playground rocks in my pockets. But I really got into it after I started playing in the creek. And I just thought, there's got to be something more. What can I do with these rocks? What am I going to do with them? They're piling up, they're outside, they're in my bedroom. What am I going to do with them? And I found out you could tumble rocks, and I got all into that, tumbling the rocks. That was a lot of fun. And later on, I found another place to kind of channel my creativity. Not only do I love the rocks, but I've always wanted to, I want to make stuff. I like to do things with my hands. I'm a very hands-on person. I like to make things with my hands. So I started as a 12 or 13-year-old girl. My dad has a shop in his basement. In our basement, I should say. I live at my mom and dad's house. And I would just find little bits and pieces. He had some old barbed wire, coiled up, barbed wire fencing, old rusty stuff. And I would start cutting that and bending it. And I actually made little people out of it, little stick figures, and found some yarn from my granny and made them hair. And then I started putting little beads on their arms and legs. And it just went from there to I started working with sheet metal, with copper and brass, because that's cheap and easy to get and forgiving. And as the years went on, I mean, probably after 10 or so years, I finally decided my next step is working with precious metals, so silver, gold, things like that. I'm not to gold. I'm no goldsmith, but I started working with silver, and I had some people in the community that gave me a few tips, showed me a few things, but for the most part, I had a friend in Ohio,
And I got her on the phone, and she said, "You can do it. Here's the supplies you need. Here's some safety tips." So I bought the supplies, and I just started doing it. And I got cut, and I got burned and bruised, and I melted stuff, and I made mistakes, but I wanted it so desperately bad that I just kept working and kept figuring it out, and I eventually did. I eventually figured out my soldering process, my hammering, my tools, my handy skills, and the next step from there was, now that I know how to solder, I know how to use my tools, I know how to be safe in my workspace, what's next? Well, I want to incorporate rocks, because if you go to a jewelry store and you buy jewelry, what's in the jewelry? Rocks. What's in wedding bands? Rocks. Diamonds. How can I incorporate these rocks that I already have sitting in my yard with what I know how to do now? So I spent lots of time, lots of years going to gem shows and all over the place buying these rocks because I couldn't make them myself. And I didn't know much about the process and how difficult it would be to be able to do that. But essentially, I wanted to make cabochons. And cabochons, if you think about a bead that's perfectly round, if you were to cut it in half, one side would still be round, the other would be flat, right? So the flat part is what you would lay down into your setting, into your silver, and set in there, and you'll see the round part. So I bought, who knows how many hundreds of dollars worth of cabochons before I thought, I'm done buying these. I want to do it. I want to make them myself. And what you do is you get the rough rock and you start cutting and polishing. But how am I going to do that? Is it complicated? Is it expensive? So I started YouTubing it. I started looking up YouTube videos to get a better idea of what even the process, what is even taking place here? What is the process? So, as fate would have it, in my backyard there is a lapidary school. Lapidary is the word for all of this, for cutting and polishing rocks, the art of polishing rocks. It's a fancy word, I say, of just cutting them and spinning them up. But I thought, okay, well, there's a lapidary school literally 30 minutes from my house. I should take a class, and I'll learn what to do, and then I'll see if is this feasible that I can do this on my own, get my own equipment. So last October, I took a class, and the funny thing is the school's located in Young Harris, Georgia, and I went to Young Harris University, Young Harris College, and I drove past the school every day for that 2 years that I was there because I commuted, but I never stopped. And there's literally a big sign that says Jewelry Maker and Rock Hound Haven. I just never stopped until the time was right. So last October, I took the class, fell in love with it just like I thought I would, learned the process, made some cabochons, and thought, I've got to get my own equipment. I got to do this. This is going to be so exciting, because my first love, of course, is the rocks. So what I ended up doing in that class is I had some friends cut some rocks from the creek here, from Stamy Creek. I sent some rocks to a friend in, I had a friend in New Hampshire, and then I had a friend in Kentucky who had the saws, they had the equipment, the saws that it'll take to cut the big rocks, the rough material, and I had them send it back to me, and that's what I took to my class. I took those slabs of rock. So you take your big rock, it's kind of like countertops. If you think of a slab of countertop, it's the same kind of thing. It's just smaller and thinner pieces that you start with. But I had no way of even doing that, and I thought, this is my first chance to cut into one of those rocks from the creek and see what I can do. So I took the slabs that they had made for me and sent back to my class, and I made a cabochon out of Stamy Creek, and I just about lost it. I was just so incredibly excited and touched, like, this is a dream come true right in front of my face. Here it is, I've got to get to where I can do this all day, every day myself. So I did some research on the different types of equipment that you can get, and I found a middle ground, something that I could afford that would work for me. And it's actually a machine that I used while I was at the school. And so it was great that I got to use two different machines so I could kind of decide pros and cons, what would work for me. So I got a machine maybe, who knows how long ago now, several months ago, and I started trying to figure it out. So I've only taken 1 week of instruction. I took a week-long class in this, and that's it. That's the only thing I had done until all of these months later when I got the machine and started into trying to figure it out by myself. And I struggled. I had a hard time. I couldn't figure out what was going on, and I just wanted it so badly that I just kept figuring it out, asking questions, calling people. What am I doing? What's going on? Why does my rock still have scratches? What is this? What is that? And I finally got it settled out. I changed out some wheels on my machine and I got it settled. And then I started really being able to make some cabochons, and it was just the most exciting moment to be like, look, I would go upstairs and show everyone, look at how this one is going, look at how that one's going. So now that I know what's going on, I've kind of figured my machine out. By no means am I a professional. By no means am I going to be as good now as I will be 5 years from now. That's how it works when you continue to practice and hone your craft or your skill. But I do feel confident and good about the work that I am producing. And so I thought that is one more aspect that I could put into my business. I'm already making jewelry. I'm already selling jewelry. All kinds of different things. Well, what if one more way to diversify my business, my jewelry business, would be to now add a supply aspect. So a supply and demand is how all businesses work. And yes, jewelry is great, jewelry is wonderful, it's just such a fun way to express yourself, but you're not going to die if you don't buy my jewelry, okay? You're going to make it if you don't. But if you look at it from the other point of view, if I'm making the jewelry, I have to have supplies, right? I've got to have the metal. I've got to have all of the things that it takes to go into that. I must buy my stock before I can create. So there's other artists out there in the same boat. They must buy their supplies before they create. So I thought, I'm already selling this jewelry. What if I sell these cabochons? Because there's people out there just like me who haven't found out how to do lapidary yet, or don't want to, and they want to continue to buy the rocks. What if I supply them with the rocks? So now I'm looking at a supply chain for my business. So I thought, give it a shot. So I spun up some cabochons that I felt good about, that I would want to use in my work, and I put them out there for sale, and they sold. And I thought, wow, this is pretty exciting. Okay, so I did it again, and I did it again, and I'm gonna do it again shortly when I have more material cut up and polished. So it works, I'm making these cabochons and I'm selling them, and obviously that's exciting because I love the rocks, and I love to think that something that I'm making is not only gonna go to the person who's buying it, but it's gonna go one more time to somebody else who buys that piece of jewelry that incorporated my work. But that being said, honestly, the most rewarding and exciting part for me is sharing this is my creek, the way it makes me feel. I feel so much happiness and joy and contentment when I spend time in Stamy Creek here. It's a good place for me. It's where I'm a spiritual person. It's where I go to kind of be with God and sit still and listen when I'm feeling really anxious or stressed out. I just come down here and I'm like, okay, be quiet, listen to the water, and I'm good to go again. It's my reset button. But it's just a really special place. It holds a special place in my heart. So thinking that I'm sharing that and I'm sending it out into the world is the most exciting part. That I can come down here 5 minutes. It's not even 5 minutes. It's about 3. It's a hop, a skip, and a jump from my backyard. I can take off walking, come to the creek, find a rock, take it back, make something out of it, and send it out into the world. I'm sending that same contentment and magic and happiness out to everybody, and that's the reward. That's the real reward. It's not about the money. It's not about the fame. It's about sharing that feeling that I get, and I hope everybody else feels it too. So probably the funniest thing about all of this, there's so many things that you can say, man, I wish I could have done this, I wish I could have this, but Mom says all the time that she wishes Pap could have seen all of this. And I wish too that he could have seen, I could have went to the creek, got a rock, and said, okay, here's what I've got. Wait a little while, and I'll bring it back to you and show you what it's going to look like. He would have got the biggest kick out of me taking creek rocks and making them and selling them to people. And people buying them, He would have just thought that was the funniest thing, that I'd found a way to make a profit off of just this creek. And where we're sitting here, I'm sitting kind of on this bank. All of these rocks here, there's some here and spread out all down through here. These are all, well, they're honestly all creek rocks. And they come from the garden here, where I'm sitting facing this garden, and this was Pap's garden. And I can remember in my lifetime I've hoed my fair share of corn, my fair share of rows down here, and picked beans and all of that. But the funny thing is these are creek rocks too, and the creek is over there. But Pap's theory, I always asked him, I said, well, Pap, if the creek's over there, why do we find creek rocks so far out into the yard, away from the creek? And he would always say, honey, water moves, and water eats away the banks, and it changes. So there's a good chance that, you never know, Stamy Creek could have been a river thousands of years ago before we had settled here. Or more likely than that is just the creek has moved, and it will move further and further as it erodes and eats the bank away. But it's, you know, it's not just the creek either, it's a family thing. It's a family thing, so yeah. So these are some creek rocks that I picked up in the creek. You never really know what you're going to get, honestly. It's just when you cut into it, you'll have a better idea. I do typically look for rocks like these. You can kind of see you've got some quartz there and a little bit different material here. So this is a chunk that's been broke off of a bigger piece, and so is this. And these are usually more promising than anything else. This is kind of a vein that has flowed, and if you want to say grown, it's really technically flowed through this base rock here. And these veins don't tend to be very big. This is probably one of the fatter veins that I've seen, but they tend to be more solid, less fractures, less holes. Vugs is what we lapidary people call them. So if I'm going to look for them, then I like to see something like this. This was probably worth spending a whole day in that creek just to find this, because this is going to be a more promising, more solid material. Before you cut, you should always be safe. So what you need to do is have safety glasses, protect your eyes, and hearing protection, because if you're going to do this for even 20 minutes, it's really not good for that high-pitched ring, for you to be exposed to that. So be safe first, wear an apron if you don't plan on taking a bath. Pretty solid. You just need to flatten out one edge. So I'm going to keep working until I can get a flat edge, square edge. So now what you want to do is find a stencil, or you could freehand a shape if you wanted, or you could take it straight to the machine like that. But what I'm going to do is find a stencil to draw a shape on it, because that's a little bit easier. Since these aren't very big, you're going to be limited to what you can draw. If it was a slab, you could do anything you wanted, but since these are limited, I'm going to try to find something. I'm going to try to go with the biggest thing I can go with. So what you're going to do is trace your shape. I like to use the thinner Sharpies, but mine doesn't want to work, so this is what I've got. So now what you would do, I don't need to draw lines anymore, but when I very first started, I would draw myself some lines so I would know where my saw was going to go, where my blade should go to cut away the extra. But I've been doing it long enough, I'm okay to eyeball it. But so now that we have the little pieces cut out from the bigger rock or slab, and we drew our little design on it, we want to preform it, because we have all those little jagged edges, and that's not an oval, and that's not a teardrop yet. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take it and work the sides. We're not going to touch the top or the bottom, the flat spots. We're just going to take it and work the sides on these first two steel wheels, and it will grind away the extra, and we'll just grind down to the line. We're not going to take the line away. We want to keep the line for now. It is our guide. So we will grind down to just that line, and then at that point you can decide what will be the top and what will be the bottom. It's usually kind of generally accepted that where you put your black marker is the bottom. So we took all the way down to our line, and we kept our line, and that kind of helps us, it gives us an idea of the shape, and this shape is pretty much perfect, and I can turn it over, and it's pretty much perfect on the back. We just don't want to take it away, because if you take the line away, that means that you don't have a teardrop anymore. You may have a flat spot here or there. So you leave it to ensure that you have a perfect teardrop, because it's really hard to do by hand. And now, since you left your line, and your shape is perfect, you already have your shape, you don't need your line anymore. So a lot of people, like I said, they will go ahead and just generally decide wherever you put the line is the back. If I wanted it to be this side, I wanted this to be the back, I could do that too. But I'm going to go ahead and have this be the back, because I have some material up here in this part that I'm thinking is pretty weak and crumbly, and I'm hoping that it will disappear, because as I cut, I'm going to cut this. If this is the top, this is what's going to be cut down. So you want to get rid of your black line at this point, because you don't want to have a really pretty cabochon all polished on top and have an ugly black line on the bottom. So what I do is, these are my two steel wheels. That's the most aggressive. I think that's 80 grit, and this is 220. I take this a little bit lesser aggressive wheel, and I'm just going to go around through there at a kind of a, I don't know, 45-degree angle, something like that. It's a little bit sharp around the edge. I'm going to take the sharp part off. That will take some of the black off. And when I get done with that, I'm going to move over here to this. This is the first resin bonded wheel out of this set of 6 wheels here. And it's pretty aggressive. It's a brand new wheel. So it'll just take a few times of just straight polishing the back here. And that'll get the rest of the black, and it'll make sure it's nice and smooth. So when you're ready to set it or sell it to somebody, it'd be nice and smooth on the bottom and easy to work with. So now we got our line taken away, and if you hold the stone up like this part back here is actually a little thinner, and it's a little thicker up here. That's because I did this by hand. So I sawed this rock in half by hand instead of putting it in a jig or a vise and using a slab saw, which that's okay, because it's really close to almost the same thickness, and it doesn't really matter, because as long as this bottom part is flat and you can set it on a flat surface and it doesn't rock, it doesn't matter, because all this material on the top is going to disappear. Most of it's going to disappear. For you to be able to get a pretty dome, you have to cut a whole lot of that away. So that's okay. Now you just have to remember that the polished side is the bottom, and that's the side that you want to work with. So usually when I get done doing that, if I do a bunch at a time, I'll set it polished side down, and I'll let it dry, and then once it's dry, I can go on to the next thing and dry it like that. But that's good. So now that I have this piece, I dried it pretty good, and I dried my hands a little bit. Most cabochons, unless you choose not to, but there's this idea of a bezel height. It means it's a little perimeter that runs around the outside of your stone, and when someone goes to set the stone into silver or a pre-made setting, however they want to do it, it's that little edge that you left that they're going to use to set the piece, to push their metal around. So I think the accepted world standard for bezel millimeter is 2 millimeters. So I've done it long enough now, I don't need to draw a line. I can eyeball it when I get to the machine, but it's very helpful when you start out. So what I'll do is I'll draw a line around the bottom, the pretty side that we polished, and it'll be a very, very short line. It's just a tiny line from the very edge of the stone around, all the way around, and that lets you know that's how much material I'm going to take away. That's how much material is going to disappear off the top, and when I'm done, I'll have a pretty little edge all the way around it. So that is what we're going to do. One easy way to do that, because it's kind of really hard to draw a line all the way around here and have it the same all the way around, I was taught you can use any color of Sharpie. I use blue or black usually, but if I have a black stone, I'll need to use a different color. So what I'll do is I'll take my stone, the part that's polished, the pretty part, and I'll lay it face down away from me. And then I'll use this little stick here, sometimes just my hand, but this little stick as a pivot point with my marker on it, and I can kind of roll it down to wherever I want it to meet the stone. And then when I get ready to, I'll hold my hand in place, my left hand holding the marker, and I'll just move my right hand, and it'll put a mark all the way around at the same height around my stone, so I know how much material to take away. You can measure this with a millimeter caliper if you feel like measuring it, and you'll be exactly 2 millimeters. But I just eyeball it. I've done it enough. I don't really need to use the caliper, so I just get it lined up, and then I just move the stone. I'm not moving my hand. Now I'm just moving the stone. I'm not moving my hand. This hand never moves. It's just the stone. And if your bottom is good and flat, you can go round and round and round, and you'll have the same line all the way around there. So that's a really, really short line compared to how much material's here. That means that you're going to keep what's under the line, and all of this above it is going to disappear. You can change this a little bit when you get to the machine if something happens, if the rock chips, if it breaks and it has to be another shape. You can always kind of adjust once you get there, but I try to follow this line, and when I mean follow the line, I mean cut down to the top of this line. Don't take the line away, cut down to the top, and that means all the way around the edge you'll have the same thickness of a little rim. So once you get done with that, you're just going to take it, and this is what I call a dot pot. It's just a pot of, it's kind of like what they put fondue in. And it's just a hot plate full of wax. And it is very hot, and the wax is very hot. And this black part is very hot. So to get this to where I can work with it, because I could take it back to the machine and I could do it by hand. I've done that. I do that sometimes, but it's hard. It's very difficult. And you risk taking off fingers instead of taking off rock when you're working like that. So what I've done, and what most people do, is they go and they buy, you can buy oak dowel or just like dowel rods at Lowe's or something, and cut them to whatever shape you want. And then you get this dop wax here, and this wax is very, very hot and very sticky, and it will melt to the stick and to the rock, and it will glue them together. But it's perfectly reversible. When you are done, all you have to do is put it in some ice. I put them in the freezer, and that wax gets brittle, and when it gets brittle it will break and your stone will pop off. So you just set it up there, and again you have to think about which side is the top and which side is the bottom. So I'm going to put the bottom facing me this time instead of away from me, because I want the wax to go on the bottom, because this top part is what's going to be cut away. So you just set it there, you let it heat up, you put this stick in there and kind of let, if there's previous hardened wax on it, it'll just melt into what's in there. And in about 10 minutes we will kind of turn our dop stick in the wax, stick it on the rock and let it cool, and then you have a handle to work by. So the next step, now that we have this dopped firmly on there, now you can kind of see with it next to the machine why that's helpful. But the next step is, so we're going to go from here, we're going to take that away, and all the way around here we're going to take pretty much away down to the line. And it's going to be a really steep 45-degree angle, and then you're going to have this portion left. So once you do that, here on this wheel, we'll go almost to the line, not quite on this wheel, and then we'll come over here and do this. And every time we go through a different wheel, it's just taking the scratches out from the previous wheel. So we'll go around here, we'll go around here at our steep angle, and when we're done we'll have a bevel around the whole sides, around the whole thing, with the top left, and then we'll start taking the top away, and that's how you get a dome. You have to start creating a place to make a dome from. So this is what it looks like now, and that's essentially what it's going to look like until it gets a higher and higher and higher polish. The next 3 wheels will be polishing it, and then I actually have 3 more wheels that I put on the machine and polish it. So you pretty much do the same thing over and over. You just the same rocking motion, the same all the way around through each wheel, so that each time you're doing that you take the scratches out from the previous wheel, and that's pretty much what you're left with here. And then you just You do the same thing about 6 more times, and then you'll be left with a really pretty stone. So when I get done doing that, I can show you what it'll look like as finished product. So this is the finished product. I'm actually sitting in the driveway taking pictures for a rock sale I plan to have tomorrow in the last little bit of light of the day here, and this is what you end up with from the very first rough rock to cutting and polishing it. This is the product. So now you can kind of see why I'm crazy about creek rocks. These really do have their own look. There's nothing too terribly exciting about them, but they're really consistent. They took a really high polish and they cut good, and they're just really solid material.